We're looking at section 30D, which is the information that the residential rental provider or the agent needs to provide to a tenant prior to entering into a rental agreement. And what we've done, we've copied the actual section of the Act that is sitting here, and it is, sorry, the regulations, which is sitting here, and it's page 10 down below. It's actually page 14, but it's page 10, regulation 16. So when we go through here, the first thing we're looking at is the with respect to an embedded network. So the ABN trading name of the network, of the whoever the service provider is, their contact details, their phone number, website, address of the operator, and then any of the tariffs and associated fees. So the associated fees in this regard is your setup on your disconnection costs, and this would also apply if there was a particular provider where there was only one, so it's really only where there's one provider. If there are multiple providers, then you don't need to have this information available. But inside these special conditions, what you would probably write would be that it would be AGL, their company name, being AGL, which is the brand, their website, their phone number, their address, and then you would also put at the time there's a website for tariffs. But if you know that there's a $60 connection fee and a $50 disconnection fee, then you need to note that at that stage. If you know it, the tariffs would change on a regular basis. And then what we're looking for here is if there's rent promise, if there's been the location of a homicide in the last 5 years. So obviously in the premises itself or common area for larger blocks. So this would be 30DE with regards to noting this. What you're looking at here with the minimum standards. So if you're aware that the property does not comply with minimum standards, you need to note what part of the property doesn't comply. And this is really something you'd want to get the rental provider to sign off on, because really it falls back on through to them. If Now this kicks in on the 31st of December with regards to if there's ever been a repair notice with relation to mould and or damp. Now a lot of the newer buildings have their energy rating 6 for ventilation, and the problem with that is that there isn't any natural airflow, so you'll tend to find there'll be condensation on the windows, and there will get a lot of damp or mould, and so often that'll be a building defect. But if you're aware of that from a property point of view, then you need to make sure that you're noting that into the property, into the special conditions of the disclosure firstly, and then also I'd be writing it into the special conditions. When you've got any of the disclosure points that would be yes, then you would certainly want to add those in, or add the disclosure document into the tenancy agreement as an addendum. Then here we're adding, now these would generally be added into the condition report. So it's the most recent safety check. I would also be providing the provider. So if it's Smart House and the last inspection was the 31st of August last year, then you would note Smart House and then the date. So what I would want to make sure is that you've got these compliance checks on file. So don't simply just have a date in your property management system. You'd want to make sure that you've got the compliance check. Often with agencies, they'll have the inspection date, but they don't store the compliance schedule, the compliance report. This is something which, if asked, you need to provide. So you're better off having it sitting inside your system. That goes for gas, electrical, and or pool barriers. It doesn't have here with regards to smoke alarms, but for most agencies, we're incorporating this at the same time. Any outstanding recommendations for work? So, for example, if there needed to be some switchboard changed, or there needed to be new inspection, sorry, if the inspection failed and there needed to be something repaired, then that needs to be noted inside of the condition, inside the lease tenancy agreement, the new rental agreement, needs to be noted in there as a special condition. If there's any works through to there, if the property is a rented place, a registered place. Now, what this would be is specifically with regards to heritage listing, and what you might find is that particularly some of the older areas where you've got maybe some Elwood or Williamstown, Fitzroy, Collingwood, some of those places where you might find there's either a heritage overlay where the council doesn't allow the facade of a building to be modified. So these are things that need to be noted inside of the lease, particularly now that the tenant can make modifications to a property without consent. They can't then go off and be making modifications to the external of the building without actually consent and knowing that it's going to be in breach of the heritage laws. If you're aware that if the property is being used for drug trafficking, so that would be if you know that someone, and in instances here, it's generally where there's been police called and there's an incident and you know that someone's been charged for trafficking or cultivation of drugs, so whether that's methamphetamines or a grow house. If that's been in the last 5 years, you need to note that. Now, I wouldn't be putting this into the ad, but I'd be certainly making sure that I noted this as an addendum or a disclosure document prior to a tenant signing up the lease. The rental agreement. The next one is if there is asbestos and that you know that there's asbestos, and how you would know this would be that you'd either had a report, and it might have happened whereby you sent a plumber out or a tradesperson out to do some work on a bathroom. They've come back and noted that there was asbestos in the property, so therefore you're aware of that. If you're aware of that, then you need to get an actual report by a suitably qualified person. That should then live inside of your property management system, and then each time you've got the lease coming up, you would make a note of that. Planning certificates, planning applications. You might struggle with this one a little bit because for a house it's probably okay. You might be aware of this one, and this is where the landlord, the rental provider, really needs to make sure that they're providing information. But for apartment buildings, often for some of the bigger apartment buildings, there'll be an application that might have occurred 2 years ago or thereabouts. And if you may not necessarily be aware, the owner may not necessarily be aware, but if they've received a notification there's a planning permit or an application, then they need to disclose this in the premises. If there's any notices applicable directly through to the owner or the rental provider, this might be with regards to building surveying. There might be an issue with the property. There might be a boundary issue that's ongoing, and these need to be noted as well. And if there's any works, if there's a dispute between for example, it might be a new build and there might be a dispute between the developer and the builder, that needs to be notified. It might be with regards to an owners corporation dispute, so there might be particularly around cladding. If there's an issue with cladding, that needs to be noted, and also a copy of the owners corporation rules need to be provided through to the tenant. So that's all the information that needs to be disclosed, and it is, so it's reform number 13, regulation 6 in the tenancies regs, and it's on page 10.